what's going on? This is the Body Punch Podcast. My name is Naz. This weekend, we had two fun fights in Bellator and in the UFC, featuring Ryan Bader versus Vadim Nemkov, which happened on Friday, and then the UFC coming on Thursday with Pedro Munhoz and Frankie Edgar. I wanted to talk about both of the main events that happened in both organizations. Starting off with Ryan Bader and Vadim Nemkov. I want to start off by saying I love Friday night fights. It just brings in to the weekend with all the fun fights, especially when UFC and boxing is happening. Ryan Bader coming in as most critics' favorite. Vadim Nemkov, a Fedor student, coming in with devastating power, great striking ability, and a real test for Ryan Bader. What happened was Vadim Nemkov got a head kick and it hit Ryan Bader and brought him to the ground. Vadim Nemkov started to capitalize, hitting him with short shots. And a real credit to the referee for not stopping it right away. I know a lot of people have a lot of issues with how long the fight lasted after that kick, but there's a couple things that you got to keep into account. Ryan Bader being a champion of two divisions, this is a real big test for him, and it's a real opportunity that you might just take away to defend his light heavyweight belt. You saw that he was intelligently defending in the moment. He even got up once and was grabbing Vadim. And as Big John McCarthy noted a couple times, started grabbing his glove and grabbing the cage just to get up because of that crazy head kick Nemkov got. But he did intelligently defend himself. He got up, but then we saw that he started to just show his back to Vadim, started to almost run away. I bet you he was in such shock. It's like, oh my God, what happened to me? But if we rewind and go back to the beginning of the fight, I think Ryan Bader had a good first round. Vadim obviously, I think, won, but we saw some promise in there. Ryan Bader he took him down in the fight, showing his wrestling accolades, doing that blast double, which he's known for. But Vadim was actually able to really intelligently use his jiu-jitsu to, I believe, frustrate Ryan Bader. And Ryan just got up. It's like, I've had enough of this. And so they both stood up. And the other thing was, and the commentators really noticed this, was when you get Ryan Bader on the back foot, that's a real problem for him. When you find that someone is really aggressive with Ryan Bader, that's when we see him not really thrive. It's been an issue that he did overcome in the heavyweight division because he was so much faster than everybody. That's another note that I wanted to bring up, is that the speed difference. 205ers are still big boys. But Ryan Bader was fighting at heavyweight, where he had the speed advantage. Ryan Bader demonstrated this with Vadim's mentor in Fedor, knocking him out with that slick. It was almost like a jab, but a long range kind of hop in kind of jab that he hit him with. But I just remember him hopping in and knocking Fedor out, showing that he had the speed advantage. And we can't forget about the significance of Fedor being in Vadim's camp, being his mentor. Because Fedor already studied him, studied Ryan Bader because of the fight that they had. And he was able to pass that knowledge on to Vadim. And we saw that. After the first round, we saw that Ryan Bader was really put on the back foot, like I was saying. And Nemkov started hitting the gas pedal. Really hitting him up with that boxing. And the same combination that Vadim knocked out Ryan Bader with, I saw he was experimenting with in the first round. He threw that same combination in the first round. You can see it. He saw it, and then he put it in his memory bank. That's how intelligent of a striker he is. That's why everybody was saying that this is going to be a massive test for Ryan Bader. You see that intelligent strikers do this all the time. Think of the best. They throw experimental combinations at you. And they check to see how you react. If they see some sort of opening, if they see something that they can capitalize on, they'll throw it again. And in the second round, we also saw that Bader was really biting on a lot of Vadim's little fakes. And that is due to the fact that Bader, like I've reiterated so many times in this podcast now, has fought at heavyweight. Those guys don't really throw that kind of sophisticated striking. They throw naked punches, naked kicks, and this is just what you get in the heavyweight division. This is no disrespect to anybody that Ryan Bader has fought. But that's just the name of the game up there. But then when you get to 205, we see some intelligent striking with some fakes put in there. We see a lot of that. And Ryan Bader was really, really biting on a lot of them. So Vadim looks like a killer in that 205 division. And here is another example of a double champ not being able to defend both titles. What's going on here? I think it's just you get used to one weight class, especially at an older age. Your body gets used to being able to fight in the heavyweight division. Your body adapts. That's what happened to Ryan Bader. His body adapted to the heavyweight division. It's hard to switch back. You can do all the training you want. But once you're in that cage and that door locks, this is a totally different game. So Bellator was also billing this as the greatest light heavyweight in the world. That includes UFC, that includes all the other organizations. Is that true? I don't think so. You can have all the fights you want, but until someone passes John Jones, I don't even think you got a fighting chance. Ryan Bader's great. Vadim Nemkov is great. But John Jones is the greatest light heavyweight ever of all time. You can even make John Jones the greatest fighter of all time. You have a conversation for that. But Ryan Bader and Vadim Nemkov are not the greatest light heavyweight fighters in the world. That crown still belongs to John Jones. John Jones could fight at heavyweight, which he will, have all the heavyweight wins in the world. But once a light heavyweight beats the record and just the greatness that John Jones set, nobody's going to surpass him. But great fight, great win. And this puts Russia back on the map, giving Russia its first light heavyweight champion in a major organization. And Vadim Nemkov is a great ambassador for that. And he's got an amazing mentor in Fedor, who some could put up there as the greatest of all time. So great fight. I love watching it. It's sophisticated stuff. A lot of people are saying that Bellator is second place of the UFC, but there's some fights that Bellator puts on. They're just like, yeah, I got to watch this. Ryan Bader is doing something amazing, no matter if he's the greatest of all time or not. To defend 2 belts, it's one of the hardest things to do. You can see it. The only person that I can think of right now off the top of my head that is doing it in a dominating fashion is Amanda Nunes. She's just something special. And all of these ideas that I present to you are ideas that can apply to John Jones as well. How he deal with being at heavyweight after fighting at light heavyweight for so long. Just flip the script. You know, Ryan Bader was the fighting at heavyweight, now going back to 205. So, like I just said, flip it. All of these same ideas could go to John Jones. Now, let's move on to Saturday's card, which featured Pedro Munhoz versus Frankie Edgar. I had some pre-fight thoughts that I presented to you in my last podcast. It was the second last podcast. And wow, the answer gave us the answer. Especially reading the broadcast tweets, you know, the tweets that they put on the UFC stream. It seemed like everybody thought that Pedro Munhoz won this fight. But if we look at the numbers, and I've talked to some people about this as well, if we look at the numbers, Frankie Edgar won this fight. Now, if we look at the fight, Pedro Munhoz was hitting him with the harder shots. I understand that. But at the end of the day, Frankie Edgar had the greatest poker face of all time, I think. Getting hit with those leg kicks and not even flinching, wow. Frankie Edgar, what a veteran move. Imagine he was limping around the cage like that. This would have been a Munhoz win. But Frankie Edgar recognized that. He recognized that if he flinched at those shots, well, guess what? You lost that fight. and he looked perfectly fine until his hands got raised, and then he limped off. There's a couple things to note in this fight as well, and I reiterated it time and time again, which was Frankie Edgar fought at 155. He fought at 145. He took those shots from those bigger guys. But the one thing that he had over everybody in those weight divisions was the speed. Was he able to translate that and bring it to 135? And yes, he was. For Pedro Munhoz, one shot, which he can knock your lights out with that one shot, Frankie was throwing 3-punch combinations back at him. And in those 3-punch combinations, you're not going to see a knockout ability like others, but he peppers you with those shots. I think a lot of people forget that. I know he knocked out Chad Mendes. I know he's got powerful hands, but he's not known for knocking people out. He peppers you with those shots. But with that 3-punch combination type style, for every punch you throw, I throw 3. With that style, you get these wars that Frankie Edgar is known for. This is what happens to him. He's known to win decisions. And why is that? Well, it's his ability to have that poker face, which I was talking about. Frankie Edgar throwing those 3-punch combinations makes the judges believe that he's winning the fight. From a visual aspect, let's look at it from a visual aspect. Let's see. You can't determine how hard a shot is hitting. It's not like I have a meter or something just saying, okay, this is a 10 out of the Hertz scale. It's just not possible. So what are the numbers that we look at? We look at how many punches are thrown. Now, if you look at the total strikes, Munhoz had 166 and Frankie had 135. But if you look at it from a visual point of view, those 3-punch combinations, the peppering of that jab, that's what the judges are really going to look at. And then you add on top of that Frankie got 2 takedowns in the fight. And surprisingly enough, with Munhoz's jiu-jitsu accolades, he didn't want to be on the ground. I thought that was super strange. He had a guillotine at one point. I believe it was the first takedown that Frankie had. He had a guillotine attempt. I thought that when Frankie took him down, it was it was a bad idea. Frankie has great jiu-jitsu. He has awesome wrestling. But it's not at the level of Pedro Munhoz in terms of his jiu-jitsu. The first round, I believe it was a tie. But then Frankie started breaking away. But the thing about Munhoz that you always got to wonder and you always got to be worried about is that 1-punch knockout. This is a guy that trains hard. He spars hard. And you can tell because how quickly his boxing and striking abilities have progressed. You don't move that quickly in your skill set by not sparring hard like the way that he is. The way that he was throwing those leg kicks in combination with those punches, he's and to go toe to toe with Frankie Edgar, who even in his advanced age, you could tell that he was comfortable being toe to toe with Pedro Munhoz, who, by the way, has been knocking out everybody in the division. And Frankie Edgar took some of his best shots, who with any other man would have been knocked out. But Frankie Edgar stayed calm. And the one thing that I loved about Frankie Edgar, and you don't see this often in MMA, was his ability to recognize what his coaches were telling him and to believe in his coaches and do what he's being told. Frankie was told to take him down. Right when the round started, maybe like a couple punch thrown, took him down. And he started faking a lot. Once you fake for that wrestling, double leg, single, whatever, well, your opponent is going to be worried the whole time that this guy's going to take me down. That adds an added element to the fight that wasn't there before. That's what Frankie did. He took him down once, and then for a little while, he was faking the takedown. And that left Munhoz's head right open. But at the end of the day, it was a split decision. If you told me Munhoz won, I wouldn't be surprised. If Frankie won, which he did, not really that surprised. But Munhoz was devastated after the fight. He said, he's like, what more do I have to do? I did everything in my power. I did everything that I think I could have done. And he still didn't win the fight. He thought it was Frankie Edgar's name that won him the fight. What he means by that, Frankie Edgar, Hall of Famer. The judges might believe that whatever happens, happens. If it's a close fight, they'll just give it to Frankie Edgar just because he's a bigger name. But that's not what happened. Fighters always kind of have issues like this after a loss. Frankie didn't just win because he's Frankie Edgar. He won because his coaches gave him a plan and he followed through with that plan. Which, back to that, Frankie listening to his coaches, the mental fortitude that you need to have to get into a fist fight and then sit down for a minute and listen to three guys at the same time barking orders at you is amazing. Not a lot of people can do that. Not a lot of people, even professional UFC fighters, can do that. They can't just sit down and listen to what their corner has to tell them. Sometimes they don't even know where they are. But Frankie was able to translate everything, was able to comprehend everything that was being asked of him, and then went out and did it. That determines some of the greats to some of the average fighters. Because in my opinion, yes, you can go out there and do your own thing, be a mercenary. But to get that outside perspective, like, look at this. Pedro Munhoz thought that he won the fight. But if he has some honest coaches with him, which he probably does, they would tell him, listen, buddy, you're losing the fight. You got to knock this guy out. There's no other way to win this. And with that third party kind of analysis, if you will, you're able to know if you've won or lost the fight, and then you can put the gas pedal on, or you can kind of back off or do whatever. That's what Frankie did. He listened to his coaches, and he was able to translate it between the rounds. Yeah, I mean, this is a great fight overall. Both of these fights were great in Bellator and in UFC. And just to go back, sorry, I read some comments online, and they were saying that Frankie should face Dom Cruz. That'd be a great fight. I'd love to see that fight. And who knows what, Dominic Cruz is always going through injuries. So who knows where he's at in that. But if Dominic Cruz is ready to go, then I think that would be a hell of a fight. That would be a great fight. And we'll be able to test where Dominic Cruz is at. If not, but if Frankie can't fight Dominic Cruz, then there's a bunch of other fights. The 135 division is a great division. And someone was saying online, they said that the reason why we love this division so much is we got some of the bigger guys from 145 coming in and showing their power. Then we got some of these littler guys, smaller guys, who are showing the speed. So you get a mixture of both of the good things from the bigger guys, which is the knockout capability. And then you get the movement of the smaller guys. So you're able to see the whole breadth of MMA. It's great for the division. Stacked with talent. Great stuff. And then just to go back to the Bellator fight, who I see Vadim fighting, I think it's got to be either Phil Davis or Lyoto Machida, which is coming up. And I think Scott Coker and the gang really set this up nicely. So we already kind of know what's going to happen next. So the winner of that fight will just take him on. There have been a bunch of questions that are asked. Like, especially, I was watching the live stream post-fight press conference for the UFC, and Dana White was being bombarded with questions about Bellator having a better 205 division than him, and his response was, all of those guys that are at the top of the Bellator division are guys that we let go. Corey Anderson came to mind just recently. And that was one of the questions that was being asked to him. If you were to ask me who has a better 205 division, I got to go with the UFC. I know that Bellator's got some great names, but the crop that is coming up in the 205 division in the UFC is just great. Like, we got this guy, Jiri, who's been knocking out everybody. And, well, everybody, what I mean by that, in smaller organizations, and then coming to the UFC and getting a knockout win. Versus, I believe, Volkan Oezdemir. So you got this younger crop of fighters in the UFC, which I think that just makes it even better. And we're going to get some real stars, especially with the characters that we got in the UFC. So if you were to ask me who has the better light heavyweight division, I got to go with the UFC for the reasons that I just noted. So it was a great weekend of fights. Like I said before, I love the Friday night fights. And then it leads up to the UFC. And then we saw some boxing, where Porter put on a clinic. That was a great fight. I got the dual screens going on. Watched them both. Just to talk about boxing a little bit. Man, Porter really put on a clinic. It was crazy. I think I saw a screenshot because I didn't notice this while watching it. He got a 10-9 round in all of the rounds leading up to that, the one. So it was a crazy fight. That was nuts. Really showcased Porter. Great for boxing. Great weekend of fights. I love watching it all. Then I love recapping it. This podcast gives me a great outlet. So thank you guys. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for listening. This has been the Body Punch Podcast. My name is Naz. I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.